Hi, and welcome back to another episode of the Blue Honor Vlog. I'm Kay Williams, author of OP-DEC, Operation-DEC, Blue Honor, and the Trailokya trilogy. On today's episode, I'm going to talk about the sequel to OP-DEC. It's called OP-GHO, Operation Ghost, and it starts right where we left off with Karsten in OP-DEC. So people will be thoroughly excited about that because he's like one of my readers' favorite characters. They love this book. It's very well received. Karsten is pretty cool, so I'm going to read to you from this, and I'll be back after I do that. Karsten hid under the kitchen table, pushing a metal omnibus he'd been given a day or so ago as a welcome present from his grandparents. He was 2, going on 3, and this he knew because his mother practiced numbers with him every day. His mother was 20. He wasn't sure how big that was, but it was many more numbers than he had, and it seemed so very far off. The boy's lips fluttered with the buzzing sound he made to pretend the engine drove on its own power, and not by his small hand. The noise grew a little louder as his father and grandfather argued in the hall. Peering from a pair of wide blue eyes, he looked to the women to gauge what they thought of all this. Their legs were framed by the legs of the table, and they in turn framed the men in the other room. He puttered his bus closer to see their faces. Grandma Letta had wound her hair into a long braid, thick as a rope, and slung over her shoulder. She wore thick, heavy shoes for walking in the mires. The black shawl with flowers looked warm in the dusky evening. Beside her, his mama Elke looked so much slighter. Her cheeks were dappled with the warm cinnamon freckles that denoted the authenticity of her ginger hair. Karsten liked to touch them, but they were smooth, just stains in the skin. "Elke, you must say something before it comes to blows," Grandmother Letta said, wringing her hands. Elke shrugged. She wasn't going to speak up. Karsten didn't understand much of what happened. He only knew that supper was delayed and voices were raised. He didn't care for either. Kicking his leg out, he returned to running his omnibus. "You can't go," Letta insisted. "Mutter Letta, you must understand Vater was a soldat, wasn't he? You were proud of him when he marched off to war," Elke replied. "Speak English in this house. You already don't like us living here, though I've spent well more than the past decade in this cottage, cooking and sewing for them," Letta said, settling in the kitchen with a humph. "That's why we must go." Elke placed her long fingers on Letta's shoulder and rubbed them. The older woman worked very hard. She didn't want her children to do her chores. She wasn't yet gray, far from senile, unless she resented a helping hand as a suggestion of weakness on her part. Elke wrapped her arms about the other woman's neck and kissed her head. Letta patted her hand. "Feed your son before he starts yelling, too," Letta advised. Elke bent down and bid Karsten come out from under the table. He crawled to her, offering the bus. She smiled, green eyes sparkling with her joy for him. "There's my handsome man," Elke crooned, hoisting him into her arms. "Getting too big to carry around anymore," Elke lamented. "One day he'll follow the other Reinigers in uniform." Karsten wrapped his arm around his mother's neck and rested his chin on her shoulder. He could see the men in the hall. The shadows hid them, but it was evident that he looked exactly like his father. His grandfather had lent them both their structure, but the coloring was Letta. "It is precisely for that reason I forbid you to go," Grandfather shouted. "Who will raise Karsten, Letta and I? We've grown too old to chase toddlers around. You have us in our graves, Papa." "Have more faith in the movement than that," his father said. "I know what you face when you go back. They will destroy you, as they nearly destroyed me, and they won't weep a single tear for you." The house became silent. Elke went to the stove and ladled out a bowl of stew, which Letta had prepared. She pushed the steaming contents aside, mumbling to Karsten about it being too hot yet. Pressing her mouth to his head, she cranked the tap to fill an old pitcher with water. Karsten was intent upon his father, though, and he didn't mind missing his dinner. Yet. "What is being done is wrong, and Germany will suffer for it," Karsten's father at last spoke. "What does Belgium have to do with the assassination? An excuse to murder thousands in their wake. That is Belgium's problem, not yours, Max." "It is my problem because my son will inherit the legacy," Max replied. "You blame a 2-year-old for your Thanatos obsessions? Father, your supper is ready." If you have a mind to stay long enough and eat it, Letta said, cutting him off. Let this lie for now and resume it when nourishment make you see sense once more. The men came to the kitchen. Elke sat with her boy in her arms, slicing up the stew into bites he could manage. It was still too warm for his delicate mouth. Karsten licked his lips, smelling the wonderful meal. His grandmother was master chef as far as he was concerned. His father tickled his chin. He irritably grabbed the man's fingers to make him stop. For some reason, his grip was amusing to both parents. However, he was quite serious as his attention had been turned toward his neglected appetite. Elke at last gave him his first bite, blowing out the steam so that it did not burn him. The warm stew was still a bit too warm, and he shook his head to toss it about his mouth. Elke wiped the gravy dribbled down his chin. The others settled into their bowls. When his mother had finished feeding him, Karsten was set on his feet and sent to play in the living room with his little tin bus. Elke joined him with her well-cooled bowl of stew. While she spooned the supper into her mouth, despair filled her eyes. She also watched him more closely than usual. Karsten wondered at what made her appear so concerned. If he even understood what concern was, his gut told him there was something to be concerned about, giving him that uncomfortable feeling, like when he dreamt bad things. The words between father and grandfather were fraught with meaning, but the whole of it quite beyond him. So whatever the understanding that something bad was coming from, he could not have told. He understood soldiers and going away. Perhaps they returned home, where there were quite a few soldiers. He grew giddy at the thought, missing his old room and the things they'd left behind. Yet then, why was grandfather so upset at their leaving? He pushed his bus about the rug, hardly knowing. Later that night, discussion continued until grandfather dismissed it for his pipe on the fireside. Elke drew Karsten into her arms again, and upstairs they went to bed. Her good nights lingered longer than usual. Tears welled in her eyes. "Warum weinst du?" Karsten asked. Elke kissed his full cheek and quieted him, wishing him good night. Her hand on his chest assured him everything was all right, but doubt crept in as she turned out the gas light on his stand and shut the door behind her. Why didn't she answer him? His mother always responded to his questions with some answer. He thought of her kiss, still a pressure on his cheek. The moonglow lit the frame of his bedroom door from a small window that looked like the bottom of glasses tied together with iron circles. Come morning, Karsten was up before everyone else, or so he thought. He toddled down the steps and found the garden in a mood that denied any fighting had gone on in the house the night before. A toad hopped through the dewy grass toward a thick shrubbery on the western border. The other houses in the lane were silent. Chimneys smoked, and the smell of bacon frying hung in the air. "Karsten," his mother called from the door. Karsten stood up, the toad wriggling in his fingers. "Put that nasty thing down before your grandmother sees it. Come back inside," she said. It was just as well. The spring was yet too cool, and his feet were quite frozen. Elke took his hand at the door. Grandmother passed them, muttering about bad omens. Karsten wasn't sure what that meant, but it usually preceded something that made the adults moody. "Your grandmother has made muffins and marmalade for breakfast. She's trying to make you an Englishman." Karsten bubbled with a laugh at that. "I am a German," he responded in clear English. The women were delighted. "Quite so. It will be sausages and beer for you in no time," Letta cooed. Before the muffins were finished, Karsten's father stood in the hall with their bags ready for leaving. A taxi had been summoned to the drive, and the driver collected their things. Grandfather puffed on his pipe, his brow heavy with disapproval. When his parents turned out the door, having given him strange farewells, Karsten at last understood he was not to go with them. His things were not accounted for among their satchels. He pointed at the door and muttered. "They'll be back when Christmas comes," Letta told him. Karsten demanded with another point. "You'll stay with us for a time. Won't that be nice? We have so much planned." Karsten's expression became tragic. His lips and cheeks reddened. The tears rimmed his eyes, but he made no sound. Grandfather cupped the back of his golden head and mumbled words that made Karsten's fears run off like rabbits inside a fox's. He reached out to him, and the old man was forced to give up his pipe that morning, a little earlier than usual, in exchange. "Read to him by the fire. That will help. I'll bring your coffee there," Letta said. Karsten forgot about Elke and Max, lulled back to sleep upon the lap of his grandfather and the safety he felt there. The smell of the old man's pipe, a security blanket that promised everything would be as it should. So I hope that you enjoyed that little piece from OP-GHO. It's still in process. I'm still in the work of producing it. So, once I feel like the writing is good enough, I will find it an editor and a proofer, and we'll go from there. So it might be a little while, but I can definitely answer questions about that for you if you want to drop them down below in the comments. Don't forget to hit the subscribe, and I will see you back here next month. All right, bye.